Loud. Tob. So today is the 29th of Tevet. It is the last day of Tevet today. Tonight is Rosh Chodesh Shevat. So the month moved by really quickly. We are in paragraph 26, right, Mark? Yes, paragraph 26 of the Kuzari in the first essay. If we're using the greenish book by translated by Rabbi Karabkin, we're on page 71. But I will be throwing it up on the screen anyway, so if you don't have it, we'll follow there. Last time we spoke, the Kuzari the Kuzari objected to the Haber's use of the personal history of Am Yisrael as a discussion and proof about God. And then the Haber gave a very apt mashal, what do you call a mashal, parable about meeting the king of Hodu, the king of India, by meeting him through emissaries, and he presented him with gifts, and that there would be no doubt that this king is beneficial. And that he made that same mashal being with a God sending sending angels and sending miracles, and then making a covenant with Am Yisrael. And that I want to make something, a slight distinction on something. When the Haber says to the Kuzari, oh, that's a logical religion, you're not going to find a logical religion here, it doesn't mean that Judaism is irrational. Logic here, when we talk about logic, we're talking about logic as a function of language and as a function of thought process. So here, the Haber isn't denying or dismissing rational thought. In fact, rational thought is 100% a necessary component to the individuation process in Judaism. What he's saying here is that our relationship with God is not the product of meditative states or logical deductions about what must be. Someone isn't thinking to themselves, well, the universe is cohesive, and therefore there must be this cohesive God who did this and that. No, the relationship between Am Yisrael and the Kadosh Baruch Hu is based off of a personal, national revelation of interaction with this being. It's knowledge of this being, not a deduction or a belief in this being. And I remember we were talking a few weeks ago about intuitive knowledge of God. This is what the Jewish scholars in the Middle Ages are talking about here. That our religion isn't the product of someone sitting and thinking very hard and then going, this makes the most sense. No, it's based off of this relative experience that the people had with the divine being. So that's what the mashal of the king of Hodu, the king of India, that's what he's talking about. That's what he's clarifying with the Kuzari. Just to clarify, that doesn't mean it's the absence of rational thought or logical deduction. There's a lot of logic, a lot of rationality must be a part of the Jewish experience, but we'll get into that later. Okay, let me just expand everybody so I can make sure I can see everyone. So if there are any questions, I can see. Okay, and don't feel shy, jump in whenever you'd like. Okay. We left off paragraph 26. Just to recap, Amar Kuzari, if this is so, it would seem that your Torah was given only to you Jews and no one else is bound by it. This is the Kuzari's retort to the Haber, telling him that the Jewish people are based in this covenant with God by standing at Mount Sinai. And because of that, the Jewish people and God have this bond together. But here's the thing. The Kuzari is bringing up a good point here. If this is so, it would be seem that your Torah was given only to your Jews and no one else is bound by it. What's the Kuzari? Actually, what's the Kuzari concerned about here? Does anyone have an idea what the Kuzari might be concerned about? Is this a retort of the whole system, or is this something more related to himself?
think it's a natural a natural limitation that he's saying, well, it only applies to you guys. It doesn't apply to everybody.
Exactly. And the Kuzari doesn't really care about the Jewish people. He cares about himself. And I'm not trying to say that like in a selfish way. He starts off his journey trying to improve his own actions. And if these actions only apply to the Jewish people because it's a special covenant, what good does it mean to me? What do I need from this? But he hasn't rejected what the Chaber is saying. So here the Chaber will continue. We're going to get into some sticky territory possibly. So let's hold on. Amar Chaber. The Chaber said, Kenhu, you are right. But non-Jews who wish to adhere to the Torah will share in the rewards like us, though not to the same degree. If the requirement to follow the Torah were based on the fact that God created us, then all people, white and black alike, would be obliged to follow it. Rather, we Jews are obliged to follow the Torah because God took us out of Egypt and attached his glory to us. God did this specifically for us, and we are the choicest of all mankind. I'm not a big fan of the translation. He says, we are hayav in this because of our exodus from Egypt. And his glory is attached to us because of that. And we are the segula of B'nai Adam. So what does that mean? What does it mean to be segula mi B'nai Adam? Is it a racist statement to say we are the choicest of all mankind, or we are the segula of all mankind, or that we are the chosen people? Let's break down the first part here.
But
Go ahead.
What's that? To say that this is a big sticking point for a lot of people.
It is.
And one of my best teachers used to quote the French phrase "noblesse oblige," that nobility is chosen for obligation, that you are not chosen for special privileges, you're chosen for special obligations.
Yes.
And from a Jewish standpoint, we took these obligations upon ourselves. We agreed to be segula.
Exactly. There is something to that statement. And this is something that's seen in Am Yisrael in general. The idea of being kadosh is different than the Western idea of being holy. And when I say Western, I'm just trying to say that the word holy doesn't necessarily mean the word kadosh. And this is the whole point of semantic assimilation. Semantic assimilation puts two different systems together and makes it seem like it's one system. Segula is a concept that exists in Hebrew, but it doesn't exist in English. And don't know if it exists in Khazar language, whatever the Khazar language is. And here we have the Haber, trying to explain this concept to someone who's not Jewish. And he's not pulling any punches. He's not engaging in any apologetics here, I wanted to say. He's just being completely honest. I think what Tamir is saying, is absolutely correct. That the choice here isn't saying the Jews are better, that Am Yisrael is better, that we are superior, God forbid. It's more of this obligation of ministry, if we could borrow a Western word, to the world. And I think in the Bible, in the Tanakh class right now, people are discussing the passage in Isaiah where he calls us to be an or lagoyim, where God calls us to be an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. This concept is goes in part with being an am segula. There's a poem, I forget, there's a little poetic phrase, and I can't remember who said it or where it's from, but there was a teacher of mine who used to say it a lot, and it was like, isn't it odd that God chose the Jews? It's not so odd the Jews chose God. And that's the idea behind Am Segula here. That being the choices of mankind isn't saying that they are the cream of the crop, but rather that they're the ones who became the Segula by choosing to live in this Berit with God. And that Berit, that ability, is open to anyone who wants to join. And that's what's different between something being the cream of the crop and something that's open. If something is better, inherently better, it's always going to be inherently better no matter the actions anyone else takes. A rock can never become a plant, at least as far as I know. But here, non-Jews are able to follow this berit and receive reward. And that's what he says, that the non-Jews wish to adhere to the Torah will share in the rewards like us. Now, this idea, though not to the same degree, it comes from a Talmudic precept, and there's a little footnote here, note 40. Greater is he, who is commanded and does not, greater is he who is commanded and does, and he who is not commanded and does. While gentle performance mitzvot is rewarded, his level of reward is that of one who is not commanded, and therefore his reward is less. So, I would actually like to look, not now, because it would take time to go through the sugya, but look at that sugya, Kiddushin 31a, to see what the context of this, what do you call it, dictum point is, because it's in Kiddushin, and things can often be taken out of context in modern rabbinic orthodoxy and literature, and be applied broadly. But the idea, the way it was explained that I learned, was that when someone is held to a certain law and someone's not held to a certain law, when a person who is bound by the law performs it, they have completed the law. Whereas someone who is not bound to the law, they've done something really good, but there's no mechanism in the law to reward them. And I can't think of a good example in modern day world. I do see there are some hands, so I will get to that. But I guess if a Japanese person fills out taxes for the United States, they're not commanded. They're not involved in that. But it doesn't really work because of reward and whatever. But I'm trying to think of a good example for that. So I'll think some more. I see Yoram and then Sid.
Well, question, with Am Segula, if we have, according to Tanya and some other sources, Neshama Yetera, which means God created all mankind, but we are, the way at least the Tanya say, a superior soul. Take it any way you want it. It makes us special. And, if you go to Esha Torah, there are more Nobel Prize winners among Jewish people that you can explain by many ways. But part of it is the Neshama Yetera. Now, obviously, you have obligations. It's not a free lunch. You're invited to the club, but you have to work.
Very good. I don't mean any disrespect to the Tanya or to Esha Torah or Chabad. I have the utmost respect for them. But the Kuzari works in a different frame of accepted axioms than the Tanya and Esha Torah does today. The Tanya, although based on a lot of Baraitot from the Talmud and from the Gemara, it does recreate, it does innovate the Jewish, non-Jewish divide. And the idea, I don't think it's Neshama Yetera. Neshama Yetera is on Shabbat, but the idea of a godly soul and an animal soul, this is not the classical Jewish approach. Everybody has a soul. Human beings have souls. They're created b'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And a Jewish soul isn't at all different than a non-Jewish soul. And the Kuzari does reject any idea of there being a spark of God inside of people because of monotheistic reasons. As far as Ishatora is like with the what do you call it? Nobel Prize winners. That's great, but I don't think that's what the Kuzari is saying here. What he's saying here is the reason we are bound and you're not bound is just based off of our being exited from Egypt and that making the covenant. If the reason God was God for us because he created all people, then we could talk about there being a universal covenant. And the universal covenant is something that is talked about with B'nai Noach, the children of Noah, the Noachites. Because God does create a covenant with Adam and he creates a covenant with Noah. So to what degree of obligation are non-Jews included or obligated in other mitzvot is another question, and I think we're going to get to that. But right now, he's just saying that this is the reason why we're distinct from everyone else, and it's only because of our choice of accepting the covenant. Sid, go ahead.
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment on the line where it says that non-Jews who wish to adhere to the Torah will share in the rewards, though not to the same degree as basically as the Jews. Can you comment on that and why that's the case and what he means by that?
So this is what I was trying to explain with my example of a Japanese person filling out taxes for the United States government without being a citizen of the United States. That's not a great example. I'm trying to think of a better example of something that would if a person is not obligated in a law system and they adhere to that law, there's no reason to adhere to that law. It might be good for them. They might be, they do get, God will acknowledge it. But, here's a good example. Because they're not engaged in also the lavim, how do you say lavim? In the negative commandments. Like, a non-Jewish person is welcome to wear tefillin. A non-Jewish person is welcome to keep Shabbat to a certain extent. They're allowed to do any mitzvah that they see in the Torah. But if they decide, you know what, I want to eat pork, I want to eat a cheeseburger, they're not at all guilty. There's nothing guilty against them. They're not hayab, is what we would call it. They're not obligated in any sort of punishment. So they don't get the same here to say that the sharing and the rewards. This is all English, and it's just not conveying here the concept of onesh and sahar. Onesh being a consequential action that's taken after something, and sahar being a positive consequential action. So because they're not involved in the same, they're not obligated in the same way, they wouldn't receive onesh v'sachar in the same way. So it could be beneficial for them to keep these mitzvot, but there's no cosmic or local justice, not here in this world or not here in the next world for these mitzvot. Does that help make sense? Like if they decide that they want to eat something that's not kosher, that's not a problem. They're more than welcome to enjoy. And if they want to do something that's a mitzvah, like putting on tefillin, hazak baruch, but there's no, it's not like this action is going to make them holier, so to speak. It's just an action.
Yeah. Well, I want to make one other comment. The word choicest, the choicest of all mankind, I guess I have some problems with that word. I think that's a lot different than chosen. Chosen you can interpret in a lot of ways, as you said earlier. You can be chosen, because you're going to bring a message to the world. But choicest is seeming to me very specific. Yeah. And I would say that we as Jews would have to work very hard to explain this entire paragraph away because it's very easily interpreted, understandably, in a negative way.
Absolutely, and that's why I'm stressing that when he says "am segula" or "shenachnu segule mibnei Adam," it doesn't mean choices of all mankind. And that I would like to see the original Judaic Arabic. I mean, he seems to be quoting the Torah, but Am Segula is not choices of mankind, I would say. I see Stephanie, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I had to unmute. I looked up the word segula, and an alternate meaning is amulet or like a good luck charm.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure how that would play out in this. How do we become the good luck charm for all mankind? But it's better, as Sid pointed out, it's much better than saying we're the choicest of all mankind.
Very good, very good. You know, that's actually very funny. I was reading something yesterday in a book called The Keter Shem Tov, and it was by Rabbi Shem Tov Gagin, who was the chief rabbi of the Spanish and Portuguese Jews in England, the earlier part of the 20th century, I believe. And he was writing about something, I forget what he was writing about, maybe washing hands. And he has like these extensive footnotes in there. And he says something, you know, the nature of Jewish people is to be very superstitious for no reason. And that he goes on and talks about ayin hara, the evil eye, and you know, the way people associate all these nonsenses that are in our religion. And the idea of a segula, I believe, came up. And the segula, and you see this a lot, more and more these days, people are looking for a segula for parnasa, right? Like, what can I do, a little action that I can do that will guarantee me a good income? So one of those segulot, a segula for that, is that when you cut your bread open, right, you're cutting your bread, that when all the crumbs are there, you take the crumbs, you collect them, and you put them in your hand, and you eat the crumbs. And then that will guarantee that you're going to have a good income that year. Or if you want to have a baby boy and you're not able to have a baby boy, that you should eat the end of the challah, because if you eat the end of the challah, that'll whatever. And we do this at a havdalah also, like when you pour the wine out and to extinguish the candle, some people take their fingers and they put it on their forehead, on the back, and in their pockets as a segula. And I don't know when and where the term segula got applied to these superstitious actions. And I'm not saying if you do them that they're wrong or bad. I'm just saying that it's a new term, it's a new concept, it's a new application of the word segula. And I think it has to do with the idea that it's a treasured action. Segula can mean a treasure also, right? So like by doing this thing, you're unlocking a treasure. I think that's how they're related and how it became to be a good luck charm also. But I would actually like to look into that more. But like, yeah, well, you could read it that way. Maybe we're the good luck charm of all mankind, or maybe we're the opposite.
I'd like to add to that. When you were talking about that, you were reading about the washing of the hands. Mm-hmm. A Middle Eastern good luck charm is the khamsa, the hand.
Ah, yeah, that's
so. And that's also very superstitious. It's supposed to give you either good luck or prevent evil from entering your house.
Right. That's exactly how it came up, because like with the Syrian community, they won't tell you that they have 5 children, because that means hamsa, right? They won't say I have 5, because then it'll look like you're warding off the evil eye from that. It'll look like you're being rude. So they'll say like I have 4 and 1 children or something like that.
I was also going to add, I was thinking about the fact of that we were chosen, the Jewish people were chosen to be a light unto the nations, as you had said before. I also think that when we have a child who becomes an adult as a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, mm-hmm. they become a son of mitzvot. In other words, a son of good deeds. They're supposed to do good things for the world and for their community. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're telling them when they become an adult at that age, yes. That they are now part of the community. They are obligated to do mitzvot, to right. do good things.
Right.
And it's not just for our Jewish community, it's for the world.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. There's an there's an obligation here, and we're actually going to get into that in this next section here. And it's a very beautiful section, but there are a lot of subtleties to it. So why don't we actually go ahead and do it? Unless there are any other comments.
Another comment.
Yes, please.
I think that we have a lot of problem with the idea of the translation and the word chosen because of the connotation that has of that I'm choosing this over this, and therefore this is better than this, or this is better than that. And the connotation in English, especially, is that you prefer one thing over another, or that somehow you're giving a preference. And to say that God prefers us or chooses us over the other nations has a negative connotation. And I like your interpretation of the word segula, meaning also treasure. And I think in terms of treasuring, like you can treasure different things for different reasons. And it doesn't imply that it's a better word because it doesn't imply that one thing is better than another. It's like you treasure your children. You're not choosing one over another. You're treasuring them all for different reasons because they're different people. And our being segula for God is we're chosen, and you can even imply it's an implication of a special relationship without implying superiority. And that's,
Yeah.
I think, the key to looking at it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And there's something else that I learned from Jose Faur, who said that understands it this way. This is no different. Saying that we are Am Segulam is no different than when the American national anthem says, we're the land of the free and the home of the brave." That this is a national pride that we have. And that it's not to say that everyone else is, and it's not only with America and Am Israel. If you examine other national anthems, you can see that this is a very common, very widely spread motif in national anthems. Just like for example, in the Mexican national anthem, one of the chorus, there's a chorus that's one of the, I can't remember, I don't know the whole thing, but I remember that it says something like, El arcángel divino que en el cielo tu eterno destino, that we are that the archangel Michael is overlooking our destiny, por el dedo del Dios escribo, that God has written out for us, and like that God has chosen us amongst all other nations. This is also in the Mexican national anthem, and it's in many other national anthems as well. So here he's just, the way Hacham Faur understood this, it wasn't like a superiority complex, but a pride. And there's also that way of looking at it as well. And I see either Tom or Carol, I can't see who's there, has their hand up. Go ahead.
And it still bothers me because it does still seem that even though it's a nation, other people could do just as good things, but they can't. I mean, if you think of even the afterlife, they can't achieve as much. It still bothers me.
Good point about the afterlife, because that's exactly, did we get into that, or did I write that as a note? Maybe I wrote that as a note. But we'll get into that with the afterlife, because we don't. It doesn't get into the text, but I do want to point this out. The afterlife is not a social club only open to Jews. It's open to every single member of the human race. It's a non-Jew who learns Torah, or it does good things, the Gemara says, receives the same reward as the Kohen Gadol in the world to come. And here there's no racial barriers, genetic barriers, national barriers. The afterlife is Olam HaEmet, the world of truth. And all of these social constructions and social conventions that are created in this world will fade away at that point. And all that's going to matter is the mitziut, what do you call mitziut? the reality of
So
things, the truth of things.
this
Yeah.
just in this world, but still you can't, you're lesser in this world then. If you
One more time?
can't achieve it because you're not in the group.
I would say that that's not only Am Yisrael, that's everybody. And remember, at this point, the Kuzari is talking to a Haber who's representing not only a religion, but a nation in exile as well. And this is going to be the Haber's contention, the Kuzari's point of contention for the next few paragraphs with the Haber. Like, what are you talking about? I don't care about your nationality. I don't care about you as a people. I only care about my actions with God. So what does any of your nationalistic, very particular point of view have to do with me and my relationship with God? And that's exactly what the Kuzari is going to be pushing back on. Norm, go ahead.
Well, we have to remember that we have a history, just as others have a history. And our history is that we were slaves in the land of Egypt.
Yes.
And God took us out from there. And now we have no longer a slave mentality.
Very good. Absolutely. That's actually a very, very good point. After being slaves, we could have very much been very cowardly and meek and scared, but here we're not saying that. Not only did we used to be slaves, now we're Am Segula. That's actually I like that. Very good. Very good point. I like that. Thank you. Irene, go ahead.
It probably strikes the Kuzari as strange that we are chosen, because in his eyes, before he met the Haber, the rabbi, he thought we were despised.
Oh,
because we were powerless.
that's
because
actually
we were small people who were despised.
Yeah.
And yet when he gets a chance to speak to the rabbi, he hears that we are a treasured people.
That's actually very good.
And
that goes right in hand with what Norman just said. Here we are.
And I think that the treasuredness is our obligation, and it's that we, for the elevation at Sinai, that we are probably more suited for the mission
Very
that
nice.
we have.
Very nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Of course. There's an old Ladino Judeo-Spanish saying that is mi nombre es what is it? Mi nombre es oh man, I'm blanking on the name. That's embarrassing because it's the name is a very prestigious name. Mi nombre es Alvar Benel es todo. My name is Alvar Benel, and that's all that matters. And the meaning of the saying is that the Sephardim in Spain had a very aristocratic attitude, even if they were water carriers. Meaning they saw themselves not as downtrodden, even if they were downtrodden. And it didn't have nothing to do with how other people treated them, but it had to do with like their own perspective in life and how they saw their own how they were in charge of their own fortunes with God, and that they kind of took like a responsibility for whatever was happening, and it was very interesting, and that the kind of like the idea that who is rich, the person who has happy with their lot. So here, it's the Am Yisrael. They're right now in Spain. They're not, there's the convivencia, everyone's living, coexisting, but they're not, the top of the heap. Here, the king who isn't in Al-Andalus, who's in Hazar, he even knows, and they don't even have Jews in Hazar, and he even knows that the Jews are no good and downtrodden. And here he's encountering this Haber who's saying, we are Am Segula. That's gotta be one of the reasons in his mind where he goes, what are you talking about? Give me a break here with this nonsense. So very good. Thank you very much for that. That's a great perspective. Okay. So let's see here. Paragraph 28. אמר הכוזרי, אני רואה אותך מהפכתך היהודי, קרא לסב בדיבורך רזה אחר שהשמן. He says, careful Jew, you are regressing. Your speech has gone lean after being fat. Or here it says rich, but shaman, like oily, but like fat, like it kind of like the cows in Paro's dream. You had the skinny cows and the big cows. So here he's saying you had like a nice big cow that I accepted, but you turned it to its front, and I see that it's very skinny. There's no depth to what your words are. So I was buying what you had to say, but now I'm going to reject it. So the Haber responded, Ben Razeh ben Shaman, הרחב לי ליבך עד שאפרש אותו, lean or rich. Please just keep an open mind until I have explained myself. So like we said before, what the Kuzari is rejecting here is this little note that I wrote. I want to know about God, not about you. You're telling me about Am Yisrael, about your nation, about why you guys are good. I want to know, how is this going to affect me? What do I need to do? That's what's bothering the king here. So the Khazar king says, say what you wish. Go ahead, I'll listen. Okay. Now we're gonna have to the Haber, he's going to be getting into a levels of life. And we're gonna see where this is going. And we're going to talk about, we've probably even heard of these concepts before. This is a nice little source to know that where do we find it here. So here, let's see. We're on paragraph 31. Good. Any comments, questions, concerns? Tov. Amar Haber. בדין העניין הטבעי מתחייב לקיחת המזון וגידול וההולדה. So he says regarding organic behavior, I just want to also point something out. I like pointing things out like this. We have this, oops, I should probably, there we go. This word here, hatibi, I underlined it, and now I'm going to highlight it. It's often called teba. Teba is nature. But interestingly enough, there isn't a Hebrew word for nature prior to interaction with Arabic speakers. Once Arabic philosophers and Jewish scholars started interacting, the Arabic word for nature, taba, became part of Hebrew, and we just started calling things hatebi, hateba, and we incorporated that concept into our lexicon. This is interesting because prior to that, Hebrews didn't think of there being a natural matter. Everything is and was b'dibur Adonai, the speech and interaction of God. But here in the Middle Ages, we accepted this concept of teva, and it won't be until much later in the 1700s, there's going to be a Hacham by the name of David Nieto in England, who writes a book called La Providencia Divinidad, the Divine Providence. And he writes in there that God and nature are one, and it causes an uproar. And the people wanted to throw him into harem because they were saying he was a pantheist. But if you read his work very carefully, he's not anything but pantheist. He's saying that nature is simply the mechanism of God in this world. And it's a whole interesting read. But neither here nor there. He's just, let's get back to what the Kuzari is saying. I just wanted to point that out. Okay. So he says, regarding organic behavior, I guess is how he translates it, we find that creatures require nourishment, they grow, reproduce their own kind. בכוחות וכל הנאהם, והתייחד בזה, הצמח ובעלי חיים, מלבדי האדם והאבנים והמוצאים והיסודות. And each type of creature has its own powers and necessary qualities, conditions. This is true about the plant and animal kingdoms, to the exclusion of non-living things in nature, such as earth, stone, metals, and pure elements. So here, the Haber gives us 4 different levels. Did he give us 4? More or less. He gave us at least 3. I don't think he really gave us the 4th one. But I will tell us what this is. I think at the note, you can see it on the side here. Aha. you have this, excuse my handwriting, it's whatever, but you have this phrase called ditham. Ditham is Dalet Sameh Het Mem, right here. Well, you can't really highlight it, but ditham. That stands for Domem, Somchem, Hayot, Medaber. And those are the 4 different levels of creation. Domem are things like the rocks, the stones, the minerals, golds, the elements. Then you have Somchem, which are plants, things that are tsemeach, things that sprout, things that mushrooms, things like that. Hayot are the animals. They're the creatures that move and reproduce sexually or asexually, that have cells that split, and vertebrates, invertebrates. And then you have the medaber. The medaber is the speaking being. And on Monday we discussed in another section of rabbinic mysticism that in the Targum Ankylos, on the verse in Bereshith when it says God created a living being and blew by blowing the breath of life into his nostrils, he created a ruach melalel. A ruach melalel translates in Aramaic as a living spirit, a speaking spirit. So here, a medaber is the human being, and that's what differentiates the human being from the animal, from the balei hayim. So the Kuzari paints this existence, this creation, this hierarchy, if you will, of creation. And in paragraph 32, he says, Amar Kuzari ze klal shetarich lefarot otov aval emet hu. Yeah, okay. It's a very oversimplified painting of the universe, but I accept it. It's true. What you say is accurate. Oops, did I go back? No, that's the right page. Okay, let me just, okay. So the Haber continues. Haber, where were we? 33? Yeah. And regarding animal behavior, all animals share the same life force, which provides them with mobility, natural instincts, traits, senses, the ability to process information, desires, and the like. So what separates trees from rocks? Rocks are immobile. They don't grow. I mean, they might have erosion and get bigger and smaller depending on how the erosion affects them, but there's no dividing of cells. There's no mitosis. It's a rock. It's an element. It exists. That's it. The tree grows and develops. The animal, that separates the animal here is that they have desires and instincts. They want to reproduce. They want to eat. They want to sleep. No, that's not it. But they have all those abilities in them. And the Kuzari says, yeah, also well known, it's irrefutable. I accept what you're saying. Where are we going with this? The Haber continues, and regarding intelligent behavior, the human being is distinguished from all other animals. I'm not sure if this was a point of contention for them. I'm not sure if in times past that people saw themselves as distinct or just like animals. I know today there are people who say, no, people and animals are exactly the same, except we wear clothes. That's it. And I don't mean to offend anyone who's an animal rights activist. Animals do have rights, but it has to, in the Jewish concept and the Jewish mindset, animal rights have to do so much more with our obligation to be higher beings than that they're the equal to us. It's more that we have to treat animals correctly because they are creations of God and we are entrusted with their caretakers. But here he's saying man's higher intellect requires of him more refined behavior, the establishment of civilizations, the exercising of social justice, and other forms of conduct and etiquette. And what's interesting here is that the Haber uses the word ve'hithayev mimenu, that we are tasked with this. All human beings are tasked with this. Mithayev mimenu tikun hamidot v'hama'on v'hamedina, that we are there to fix and when I say fix, I don't mean repair, I mean to affix, to in place, to metaken, to I don't know how to say the other, establish. There we go. To establish these refined behaviors, to establish civilizations, to establish justice, social justice, to establish etiquette and proper behavior in our world, just by din of having a higher intellect. That's what obligates us to having a higher intellect here. The Kuzari says, okay, that's also true. I buy that. Yeah, sure, why not? Okay, now this is where we can get a little sticky. The Haber then says, and what do you think? And what level do you think ranks above the human? The Haber, the Kuzari, he says, Na'alat ha'hamim hagidolim, the great and wise men. And if we're thinking about who is he talking about, really, he's talking about the philosophers here. The philosophers are the ones who have this divine intellect and active intellect, and that they become one with this active intellect. They're basically God incarnate. And we saw that also, in with Jesus. Jesus is God, but as a man, and these hamim, wise individuals, are rank and file above human beings altogether. I'd like to point out just also here that in the Hebrew mindset, a chacham can be of any religion, any race, male, female, anyone can be a chacham. There's no bar to wisdom in the Hebrew mindset. In the Greek mindset, Greeks are chachamim, everyone else are animals. And everyone's particular, but here we are equal. Everyone can be chachamim. That's why it says ma'alat chachamim hagidolim, that they are chachamim. Amar HaKuzari. Excuse me, Amar HaHaber. Where'd it go? So the rabbi, the Haber responds to the Kuzari's point that the Hamim Gedolim are the greatest above humans. He goes, well, I only wish to classify levels between things which are fundamentally different, such as inorganic matter versus plant life in human beings versus animals. But to classify within the same type by drawing distinctions between those with more and those with less is unproductive. Those types of classifications do not examine traits which fundamentally define the level and so cannot be considered true distinctions. So he's just saying, okay, you want to say that the Hachamim Gedolim are greater than people, but anyone can become a Chacham anyone, that's open. It's just a distinction of more and less. A rock isn't the same as a tree just because the tree is a little bit more fruitful than the rock. They are completely distinct. The animal is not more of a tree because it has 4 legs and the tree doesn't have any. They are completely distinct. Same thing between humans and animals. They are 100% black. You can't, a tree can never become an animal. You can't train a tree and teach it, how to move or how to fly, and then now it's a chicken or a cow. The same, there's an old joke where there's a Jew who lives in this Catholic neighborhood. And this was back before Vatican II, when Catholics were not allowed to eat meat on Friday because that's when Jesus was crucified on a Friday. So as a sign of mourning, they didn't eat meat on Friday. It's kind of like, the 9 days, but every week. And so there's a Jew who moves into the neighborhood, and every Friday he's cooking a roast and he's barbecuing chicken in preparation for Shabbat. And the meat smells are wafting throughout the neighborhood, and the Catholics can smell it, and it drives them crazy. And they go, we have to take care of this. So what are we going to do? Well, we can't kick him out of the neighborhood. That would be anti-Semitic. So what should we do? Let's convert him to Catholicism instead. That way, he'll only eat fish on Fridays. So they go to him week after week, and they try to convince him to become a Catholic, and eventually it works for whatever reason. And they go to him, and they take the holy water, and they sprinkle him. They say, born a Jew, raised a Jew, now a Catholic. And he goes, hallelujah. And the week goes by, and everything seems fine, but then Friday afternoon comes along again, and they can smell the meat wafting through the neighborhood, and they go, what the heck? and they're very angry. They're going over to reprimand him, and they get to him, and they see that he's putting this big, nice piece of roast on the fire, and he takes out some water and he starts sprinkling. He says, "Born a cow, raised a cow, now a fish." And he changes the nature of it. So the same thing here. You can never, ever, ever make a cow into a person. You can never, ever, ever make a fish into a tree. They're completely different. Here, okay, yeah, the Jew being a Catholic, that has to do with more with like, it's
I like
not the
that
same
joke.
thing. Thank you. But here he's saying just because the wise philosophers are very much smarter and very much wise, it doesn't mean that they're entirely above the level. They're still human beings. A human being is a human being is a human being. So the Kuzari says, if so, there is no physical creature on a higher level than a human being. That is it. Human beings are the highest level physically. You can say they're angels and things like that, but we're talking about Tevi, remember it, the physical, natural elements. Let's see here. Okay. Let's introduce what the Haber has to say in response to this natural limitation, and then we'll break there for the week. And then we'll pick up next week. So really quickly, we should look at it. We'll discuss this next week also, but just so we can get introduced to this thought, so we can think about it throughout the week. Amar Haber, the rabbi said. For time's sake, I'll just read it in English. But let us say we could find a Superman who could walk through fire unscathed, who could go without food and not starve, who could radiate from his face such a bright aura that an eye could not look directly at it, and who would never become ill or weak. And when this Superman, which I don't like that terminology, it's not a good one, but whatever. When this person will have accomplished his purpose in life, he would die of his own accord at a set time, like someone who lies down on his bed and goes to sleep. And right before his death, let me just make sure, can you all see? Yeah, and right before his death, this person would know everything that happened in the past and all that will transpire in the future. Would you not agree that this person occupies a separate level from the rest of mankind? Because this person is entirely different, doesn't have the same nature as human beings. I don't know if you could argue it entirely, but that's what the Haber is saying. What if there was such a person? So let's just see Kuzari's response real quickly, and then that's what we'll break. This level is for a divine angelic creature, if it all exists. This behavior belongs to the divine category, not in the human, animal, or organic category. So he's challenging him on two fronts. The Kuzari says, first off, this is a divine angel. That's all different. That's completely different. But we're not talking about divine angels. We're talking about the ditzham that we spoke about. Domen, somchim, chayot, and medaber. Those are the levels we're talking about. So if there's something else in this world that's beyond that, that would be fantastic, but I don't think so. We're talking about angels here. Any thoughts, comments, questions, challenges to what either the Haber or the Kuzari is saying? Tov. Okay.
He's introducing a whole new category of divine.
He is introducing a whole new category here.
From the four that we were talking 2 paragraphs ago.
Exactly. So we'll break here. We'll pick up next week with this new discussion of what this divine character is, divine, if it is in fact a divine character, if it exists at all, and we'll pick up from there next week. Okay, let me just Tov.
Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you,
Thank
Yosef.
you, Yosef.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yosef. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
You all know.